G'day, watch this.
And this comes down to the government intrusion into every facet of Australian life. And this is increasingly so. We're seeing this particularly with the federal government, but we're also mindful of what would happen in relation to the states. We think that if it's outside of those core duties which the Constitution prescribes, then that should be left to private enterprise. And that if there is a need, private enterprise will then fill that, and they should return to limited power. We have strong views on the two new federal taxes. The carbon tax, which of course is going to bite in the next couple of days, and we're going to see that there's going to be a significant anger in the Australian public. We've seen that there was a significant anger when this was announced. It seems to have sort of died off a little, but as soon as that starts to hit people's pockets, then they're going to be fired up about this. And of course, CANdo has taken a significant role in this debate and has been actively fighting the carbon tax and also the mining taxes, which will really cripple the Australian economy and foreign investment would cease to exist. We also believe that the federal government has problems in relation to the GST, where, for example, the states are spending 40% of the money, they're only raising 20% of the revenue. Now that is a problem, and we think that needs to be addressed and that balance should be returned to its proper state. We have strong views, constitutional views, on same-sex marriage. The position that CANdo has taken in relation to same-sex marriage is that in 1901, with Federation, there was a clear understanding of what marriage meant. It was understood at that time that marriage was between a man and a woman to the exclusion of all others. And of course, what is the mechanism in our Constitution for constitutional change? And we believe that this would be altering the intended consequence of the Constitution, and we would be mounting a High Court challenge if this were indeed to pass. We believe that if you intend to change the meaning of the Constitution, which defining marriage as anything other than that would do, you need to refer that to the people. This isn't a matter for the judges or the politicians the judges to interpret through the High Court, or for politicians to impose on the people. You want to change this, you put it to the people by referendum. And that's the position that we've taken in relation to same-sex marriage. We have views, and this is something which has been a large issue in New South Wales, and that's in relation to governments wanting to regulate a punter which is completely un-Australian. If somebody wants to do something with their own personal assets or money, that is their business, and that government should not intrude and make decisions in that respect. Of course, going a little beyond the scope of this discussion today, that would have increasing ramifications into other areas. That would affect sports communities. The onflow of that is endless, and we believe that is not an area that government should be intruding into. We have views in relation to Australians deciding who should come into their country. We have a strong position that somebody who's coming direct from a place of persecution would be completely acceptable. That would cover people, for example, like the Vietnamese, who came direct from the place of persecution. But when you have people coming from safe third countries to Australia, choosing their destination, we think that that's unacceptable. We also think, and we were glad to see that the Coalition had adopted the policy that CANdo has long been advocating, that asylum seekers who are destroying their documents or using fake documents to come into Australia should be deemed to be acting in bad faith, and that they should be assessed in that way, and that should be unacceptable. And we're glad to see that the Coalition has adopted that policy also. We have views in regards to government effectively or otherwise stealing personal property. We've seen this at the moment. It started with the Peter Spencer case, and we're now seeing it with coal seam gas, where there's this complete disregard for personal property. We're not saying for a moment that the individual owns the minerals that exist under that land, but for them to intrude without the rights of the landowner onto the property is completely unacceptable. And we have a campaign that we've been mounting around that also. We also have strong views about governments gagging the people. Freedom of speech, this comes down to, and freedom of the press. And we've seen that at the moment, as David alluded to a moment ago, with campaigns mounted against individuals. I mean, what is to say that an individual proprietor cannot have their views represented in a media outlet? We see that with the Murdoch empire. It was with the Fairfax empire under the Fairfax family, and we've moved away from that, where we had strong editorial control and strong opinion that was coming from these outlets. And so we believe that freedom of speech should not be disregarded by some government legislation that doesn't understand the ramifications that will have. We also have views on our soldiers. And we saw, for an example, where prosecutions were centralised under the the Director of Military Prosecutions, and our soldiers who acted in the way that a soldier would be expected to act. If somebody was firing upon our soldiers, I think it's perfectly acceptable that they would return fire. And of course, we saw that there were prosecutions which were to be proceeding, which eventually were pulled at the last minute, but they were prosecuting our soldiers for simply doing their duty. And we've had a campaign around that also. Stopping electoral fraud. We saw, for example, the most recent case of this was with GetUp. And GetUp mounted a campaign just before the federal election where they managed to have 100,000 voters. And the analysis of that was that those 100,000 voters were in areas where there was a sufficient margin that 100,000 did in fact affect the outcome of the election. And we thought that was completely improper. We've also seen that these mechanisms that have been put in place since the 1980s as a measure to make voting easier have had significant consequences where it really has opened our system to electoral fraud. And we think that these issues of electoral fraud need to be addressed. And that's something that CANdo is working towards also.